I sat on the floor of my living room for what felt like hours, the cool pages of my husband's final gift pressed against my chest. The weight of it, the love, the foresight, the sheer scale of it, was almost too much to bear. Sorrow for the man who had loved me so fiercely, and fury for the vultures circling his legacy, warred inside me. Finally, I moved. Not with the slow, defeated shuffle of the past weeks, but with a purpose that made my joints ache less. I carefully gathered every document, every deed, every bank statement, and placed them back in the locked folder. I hid it in the one place Dawn would never think to look, inside the hollowed-out base of an old, heavy ceramic vase my husband had made in a long-ago pottery class. It held his ashes. It was the one thing in this house they would treat with morbid respect, or more likely, avoid entirely. Then, I made 2 calls. The first was to my husband's old friend, Benjamin Reed. He was a retired lawyer, a man of dry wit and unshakable integrity who had stood by my husband's graveside with tears in his eyes. I didn't explain over the phone. I simply asked, "Ben, can you come over? It's about Robert. And it's urgent." The second call was to the number on the bank statements. I identified myself as Maeve Sterling, gave them the account number, and calmly stated I believed there had been fraudulent activity on the account and needed to freeze all transactions immediately and schedule an in-person appointment with the bank manager for first thing Monday morning. The voice on the other end, initially routine, became very attentive, very quickly. Ben arrived within the hour. I served him tea in my chipped mug, his eyes taking in the half-packed boxes, the stripped shelves. His face tightened with anger. "Maeve," he said gently, "what have they done to you?" I didn't answer. I simply handed him the folder. He read in silence, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. When he finished the will and the personal letter, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "That clever, secretive bastard," he whispered, a fond, sad smile touching his lips. Then he looked at me, his eyes sharp. "And they have no idea." "No," I said, my voice steady. "They think they're pushing a helpless old woman into a bingo hall. They think they're claiming a crumbling house." Ben leaned forward. "What do you want to do, Maeve?" For the first time in months, I smiled. It felt strange on my face. "I want what Robert wanted. To protect myself. And," I added, the steel entering my voice, "to teach a lesson." "A legal lesson," Ben clarified, but his eyes were twinkling. "The only kind worth giving," I agreed. We talked long into the night. Ben explained the powers I held. As the owner of their apartment building, I could, with proper notice and cause, begin eviction proceedings. As the majority shareholder in Dave's company, I could call for an audit, question management decisions, even influence Dave's position. The fortune in the bank was mine, outright. "But," Ben cautioned, "if you move too obviously, too quickly, they'll cry coercion. They'll claim you're not in your right mind, just as they threatened. We need to be surgical. We need them to overplay their hand in a public, undeniable way." "They've given me a deadline," I said. "The movers come Monday. They're bringing legal papers to have me declared incompetent." Ben's smile turned grim. "Perfect. Let them." The weekend passed in a surreal calm. Dawn and Dave came by on Saturday, expecting to find me weeping or packing. Instead, they found me in the garden, quietly tending to Robert's violets. "Mom, are you feeling better?" Dawn asked, suspicion in her voice. "Much better, dear," I said, not turning around. "I've been thinking. About memories. About what we leave behind." Dave snorted. "Philosophy won't pack these boxes, Mrs. Sterling. Clock's ticking." "I'm aware," I said softly, finally looking at him. I held his gaze until he looked away, unnerved. On Sunday evening, Ben came over with a young, fiercely intelligent associate from his old firm, a woman named Chloe. We went over the plan one last time. My role was simple. Show up. Be calm. Be dignified. Let them hang themselves. Monday morning dawned gray and cold. I dressed with care in a simple, elegant navy blue dress I hadn't worn in years. I pinned my hair up. I looked, I decided, not like a victim, but like a woman who owned several city blocks and a significant portion of a mid-sized corporation. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the movers. It was Dawn, Dave, and a man I didn't recognize, their lawyer, clutching a thick briefcase. Behind them, a sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped a woman in a severe pantsuit, introduced as a geriatric care specialist they'd hired to assess my capacity to live independently. The final, cruel piece of their plan. "Hello, Mother," Dawn said, her voice brittle. "Are you ready to be reasonable?" "I'm always reasonable, Dawn," I replied, opening the door wider. "Please, come in. We have a lot to discuss." They filed into my living room, their confidence a tangible force. The lawyer laid papers out on the coffee table. The specialist began making notes on a clipboard, her eyes clinically scanning the room, and me. Dave got straight to the point. "We're out of time. Sign the transfer papers, consent to the evaluation, and we can make this transition smooth. Refuse, and we file for conservatorship this afternoon. You'll lose the house anyway, but it'll be uglier." I didn't look at the papers. I looked at my daughter. "Is this really what you want? To have a court declare your mother a lunatic?" Dawn shifted, a flicker of shame crossing her face before it hardened. "It's for your own good, Mom. You're not thinking clearly." "Oh, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said. At that moment, there was another knock at the door. Before anyone could react, I called out, "It's open." Ben walked in, followed by Chloe and a man I recognized from the bank statement's letterhead, Mr. Aldridge, the senior bank manager. They looked like a different species than the people in my living room. Calm, professional, emanating quiet authority. Dave shot to his feet. "Who are these people? Mom, what is this?" "These are my guests," I said calmly. "Mr. Benjamin Reed, my legal counsel. Ms. Chloe Vance, also of counsel. And Mr. Aldridge, from First National Trust." Their lawyer paled, recognizing Ben's name, a legend in probate court. Ben spoke, his voice filling the room. "We are here to witness the service of several notices on behalf of Mrs. Maeve Sterling." He nodded to Chloe. Chloe stepped forward, a folder in her hand. Her voice was crisp and clear. "To Mr. David and Dawn Sterling, tenants of apartment 4B at 1247 Maple Avenue. Please be advised that as the owner of said property, Mrs. Sterling is terminating your month-to-month lease for cause, specifically, harassment of the landlord and violation of the covenant of quiet enjoyment. You have 30 days to vacate." Dawn's mouth fell open. Dave's face turned purple. "Owner? What the hell are you talking about? We rent from Sterling Properties." "Sterling Properties is a holding company," Mr. Aldridge said politely, "wholly owned by the late Robert Sterling, and now by his sole heir, Mrs. Maeve Sterling. Your rent checks have been depositing into her account for the last 2 years." Chloe continued, unfazed by their sputtering. "Second, to Mr. David Sterling, employee of Tech Dynamics Incorporated. Be advised that Mrs. Sterling, as the holder of a 28% stake in said company, has called for a full forensic audit of the management and accounting practices, beginning with your department. You are to preserve all documents. A formal notice from the board will follow." Dave looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He worked in accounting. "Finally," Chloe said, turning the full force of her gaze on the geriatric specialist, who had stopped writing entirely, "any attempt to medically or legally declare Mrs. Sterling incompetent will be met with a defamation and malicious prosecution lawsuit of considerable severity. We have documented your threats." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Dawn collapsing onto the sofa. I stood up. I walked to the center of the room, feeling the eyes of everyone upon me. I looked at my daughter, who was staring at me as if she'd never seen me before. "You came to take my home," I said, my voice not loud, but carrying to every corner. "You came to take my dignity. You thought I was nothing. a burden to be moved. I picked up their incompetency papers from the table, held them for a moment, and then let them flutter back down. But a house is just wood and stone. Dignity is something you can only give away yourself. And as for what I am, I paused, looking at each of them, the greedy son-in-law, the mercenary lawyer, the hired specialist, and my lost, bewildered daughter. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. You'll find out exactly what I am in court. Now, get out of my house. True to his character, Dave did not apologize. He hired a slick, aggressive lawyer who immediately filed a countersuit. He challenged the validity of my husband's will and the property deeds, claiming undue influence and forgery by a vulnerable elderly woman. He petitioned the court for an emergency injunction to stop the eviction, citing Dawn's delicate condition and my irrational, vengeful behavior. So, we went to court. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with the same care as the day of the confrontation. Ben and Chloe flanked me. As we walked into the cavernous courthouse hallway, I saw them. Dawn, looking pale and swollen in a maternity dress, her eyes avoiding mine. Dave, smug beside his lawyer, whispering strategy. They looked at our small group, an old woman, a retired lawyer, a young associate, and their confidence was palpable. They thought they were facing sentiment, not strategy. Dave's lawyer, a man named Crawford with expensive shoes and a dismissive smirk, approached Ben. "Reed, you should advise your client to settle. We have doctor's notes about her episodes. The pregnancy. A judge will look favorably on keeping a young family in their home." Ben didn't blink. "My client's home is not in dispute, Crawford. Hers is the one you're trying to steal. And the young family's home belongs to her. We'll see what the judge says." We entered the courtroom. It was as cold and imposing as I'd feared. Dawn and Dave took their place at the defendant's table. We took ours. Then, the judge entered. Judge Eleanor Ramos. She was in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bearing. She took her seat, opened her file, and began reviewing the case summary. "This is a petition for an emergency injunction to halt eviction proceedings, coupled with a challenge to property titles and a will," she stated, her voice clear. "Mr. Crawford, for the petitioners, you may begin." Crawford stood, oozing false sympathy. "Your Honor, this is a tragic family situation. My clients, Dawn and David Sterling, are facing homelessness at the hands of Dawn's own mother, Mrs. Maeve Sterling. Mrs. Sterling has recently exhibited concerning, erratic behavior. We have affidavits from neighbors noting confusion, forgetfulness. We believe she is being manipulated into these aggressive actions, possibly by new advisors," he said, casting a dark look at Ben and Chloe. "Furthermore, Mrs. Dawn Sterling is 4 months pregnant. The stress of an eviction poses a direct risk to her health and the health of their unborn child. We are simply asking the court to pause this vengeful campaign, maintain the status quo, and order a full geriatric psychiatric evaluation to determine Mrs. Maeve Sterling's true capacity to manage such vast assets." It was a clever, venomous argument. Paint me as a crazy old lady, my team as predators, and themselves as the vulnerable, wronged victims. Judge Ramos turned to us. "Mr. Reed." Ben stood, calm and steady. "Your Honor, if I may, we'd like to address the petition in reverse order. First, the assets. We have provided certified notarized copies of the last will and testament of Robert Sterling, along with all property deeds and financial records, demonstrating clear and uncontested ownership by Mrs. Sterling. The suggestion of forgery is not only baseless but defamatory." He placed a thick stack of documents before the clerk. Second, the eviction. The petitioners are not being evicted out of vengeance. They are being evicted for cause, specifically, harassment of the landlord, who happens to be Mrs. Sterling. We have documented threats, including threats to have her declared incompetent to seize her primary residence. This constitutes a fundamental breach of the lease covenant. He placed another folder on the clerk's desk. Finally, the issue of capacity. Ben paused and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, My client's capacity is unimpeachable. But rather than take my word for it, we would like to submit into evidence one additional document. It was discovered by Mrs. Sterling only recently, among her late husband's effects. Chloe handed a single sealed envelope to the clerk, who passed it to Judge Ramos. The judge opened it. Inside was a small, official-looking card and a letter. As she read the card, her professional composure cracked. Her eyes widened slightly. She looked up from the document, her gaze scanning the room until it landed squarely on me. She stared. The silence stretched. Dave shifted in his seat, confused. Dawn looked from the judge to me, bewildered. Judge Ramos blinked, then looked back at the card, as if verifying what she'd seen. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but which carried in the dead quiet of the courtroom, she murmured, "It's her." The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Who was her? The judge cleared her throat, her demeanor shifting from neutral arbiter to something resembling awe. She held up the card. This is a Presidential Medal of Freedom," she said, her voice now strong with disbelief. "Awarded to one Maeve Sterling, for exceptional bravery and service under fire as a field nurse during the Kuala incident." She looked at me, her eyes shining with a sudden, profound recognition. The Kuala incident. 1974. The siege at the embassy. The nurse who carried 12 wounded diplomats to safety under direct gunfire, who organized the triage in the basement. They never released your name. The file was sealed. You were Nurse M. Attorney Victoria's voice, cool and professional, cut through the lobby's tension. "Mr. Sterling, this is Victoria Stone, counsel for Mrs. Sterling. You are trespassing on private property. The police are already on their way. Any further communication will be through legal channels. I suggest you leave immediately unless you wish to spend the night in a holding cell." Dave's bravado deflated like a punctured balloon. He glared at me, a promise of future violence in his eyes, but he turned and stalked out into the night. The building manager let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, Victoria," I said into the phone. "Restraining order papers are being drawn up as we speak," she replied. "He's given us all the evidence we need. Get some rest, Maeve. The real fight starts tomorrow." She was right. Dave didn't give up. He filed for emergency custody of the unborn child, alleging that Dawn was under the coercive control of a mentally unstable relative and living in an unsafe, stressful environment. He also challenged the eviction, claiming spousal rights. We were going to court. The morning of the hearing, I dressed not in the navy dress, but in a tailored cream suit I hadn't worn in decades. It still fit. Dawn, pale but resolute, wore a simple, modest dress. We were a picture of dignified stability. The courthouse was bustling. Dave was already there with his lawyer, Crawford, who was speaking animatedly to a young woman with a notepad. A reporter, I realized. So, he was trying to try the case in the press first. Paint himself as the wronged husband, me as the wicked witch. We took our seats. The family court judge, a weary-looking man named Judge Henderson, took the bench. "Petition for temporary custody and to stay eviction proceedings," he recited, rubbing his temples. "Mr. Crawford, make it quick." Crawford stood, oozing sympathy. "Your Honor, my client, David Sterling, is a concerned, expectant father. His wife, Dawn, has been isolated by her mother, Mrs. Maeve Sterling, a woman with a documented history of erratic behavior. We have affidavits from neighbors describing confusion, paranoia. Mrs. Sterling has used her considerable and suddenly discovered wealth to evict the loving father of her grandchild from his home. We fear for the mental and physical well-being of both mother and child. We are simply asking for a neutral environment, for Mrs. Sterling to be evaluated, and for my client to have guaranteed access to his unborn child." It was a slick, repackaged version of their old lies. Judge Henderson looked at us. "Ms. Stone." Victoria stood. "Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to abuse the court's process to further harassment. The erratic behavior, Is my client refusing to be bullied out of her home? The sudden wealth is an inheritance from her late husband, the validity of which is unchallenged. As for the eviction, Mr. Sterling was removed for cause, harassment and threats. We have a recording from the building lobby last night. She played the brief clip of Dave's ranting. We are filing for a permanent restraining order today. She placed a thick medical file before the clerk. Furthermore, we have here a full psychological evaluation of Mrs. Sterling, conducted yesterday by the renowned Dr. Eris Thorne. It finds her of exceptional clarity and sound mind. We also have a statement from Dawn Sterling, affirming she left her husband voluntarily due to emotional abuse and is of sound mind. Judge Henderson skimmed the documents. He looked at Dave, who was sweating. Mr. Sterling, these are serious allegations from your wife. He's brainwashed her. Dave blurted out, losing his cool. That old woman has her wrapped around her finger. She owns everything. The building shares in my company. She's trying to destroy me. The judge's eyes narrowed. Owns shares in your company? Victoria seized the opening. Yes, Your Honor. A significant minority stake. It seems Mr. Sterling's concern for his child coincided precisely with his discovery that his mother-in-law could impact his employment. The judge leaned back, his expression turning from weary to sharply interested. I see. He looked at me for a long moment. Mrs. Sterling, you seem to be at the center of quite a storm. I met his gaze steadily. I am protecting my home and my family, Your Honor. That is all. He nodded slowly. Temporary custody denied. The eviction proceeding stands. I am granting a temporary restraining order against Mr. Sterling, barring him from contacting Mrs. Sterling or coming within 500 feet of her properties. He may communicate with Mrs. Dawn Sterling about medical appointments only, through a parenting app monitored by the court. He banged his gavel. Next case. It was a victory, but a small one. As we walked out, Dave brushed past us, hissing, "This isn't over. I'll see you in real court." He was right. The real battle was coming. But I wasn't the woman he'd bullied weeks ago. I was Maeve Sterling. And I was just beginning to understand what that meant. Outside, the sun was bright. Dawn linked her arm through mine, her grip tight. He's not going to stop, is he? No, I said, watching Dave's retreating back. But neither are we. As we reached our car, an older gentleman in an impeccable suit approached. Mrs. Sterling, he said, his voice respectful. Yes. My name is Charles Whitaker. I'm the senior partner at Whitaker, Lowe, and Stern. We handle the legal affairs for Sterling Holdings. He glanced at the courthouse. I saw the proceedings. I believe it's time we had a comprehensive meeting about your portfolio. And, he added with a faint smile, about the board seat at Tech Dynamics that has been vacant since your husband's passing. The board requests your presence. Dawn looked at me, awestruck. I felt a strange calm. This was the world Robert had built. The world Dave was so desperate to grab a piece of. It's time, I said to Mr. Whitaker. Let's talk. The game had changed. Dave was fighting for scraps. I was about to learn how to command the whole table. The award ceremony at the Retired Judges Association was nothing like I'd ever imagined. I sat at the head table, my simple black dress feeling both strange and right. Judge Morales, David, spoke at the podium, his voice echoing in the wood-paneled hall. We talk a lot about justice in these rooms, he said, his eyes finding mine. We cite precedent, we argue procedure. But sometimes, the purest form of justice isn't found in a law book. It's found in the quiet courage of an ordinary person who refuses to be treated as less than they are. Maeve Williams didn't just win a case. She rewrote the ending of her own story, and in doing so, she gave a blueprint to countless others. He called me forward. The spotlight was warm. I looked out at the sea of faces, judges, lawyers, community leaders, and in the front row, Dawn holding Serenity's hand, both of them beaming. I'm not a speaker, I began, my voice surprisingly steady in the microphone. I'm a grandmother, a gardener, a widow. For most of my life, I believed my role was to be quiet, to be useful, to not make waves. I paused, feeling the weight of the room's attention. Then I learned that the biggest waves often start with the smallest refusal. My refusal was simple. No. This is my home. That no wasn't just about a house. It was about my dignity, my story, my right to exist on my own terms. I saw Dawn wipe a tear from her cheek. The power I found wasn't in the money or the deeds, I continued. It was in the truth. The truth that love shouldn't cost you your self-respect. The truth that family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up. And the truth that it is never too late to remember who you are. I lifted the small, crystal award they'd given me. It caught the light, scattering rainbows across the stage. This isn't just for me. It's for every woman who has ever been told she's too old, too fragile, too much. It's a reminder that our stories aren't over until we say they are. The applause was thunderous. But the sound that mattered most was Serenity's little voice piping up from the front row. That's my grandma. 10 years later, the Home and Dignity Foundation now operated 5 houses across the state. I had stepped back from day-to-day operations, leaving it in the capable hands of Dawn and a dedicated board. My role was now founding grandma. I visited, I told my story, I listened to theirs. Serenity was 14, all long legs and fierce opinions. She sat with me on the porch one autumn afternoon, the leaves painting the garden in gold and crimson. Grandma, she said, her voice serious. I had to do a project for school about a role model. I wrote about you. Oh, honey, I said, touched. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. She opened her notebook. I wrote that my role model taught me that real strength isn't about being the loudest. It's about being so sure of yourself that you don't need to shout. That kindness is a superpower, and that justice. Sometimes justice is just a grandma watering her flowers, knowing she can weather any storm. Tears pricked my eyes. I pulled her into a hug. You understand it better than I did at your age. I had a good teacher, she murmured into my shoulder. That evening, as the first stars appeared, I took my tea to the garden. Robert's violets were thriving, a vibrant purple in the twilight. I touched the petals, a silent conversation with a man who had loved me enough to arm me for a battle he knew I'd have to fight alone. I thought of Dave. A Christmas card had arrived years ago, a generic photo of a new family. I'd felt nothing looking at it. No anger, no bitterness, just a distant pity. He was a lesson I no longer needed to study. The back door opened, and Dawn joined me, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. Penny for your thoughts, Mom. I was just thinking, I said, leaning into her, about how the things we think will break us are sometimes the very things that show us how strong we are. She nodded, looking at our home, warm and lit against the gathering dark. He tried to take everything. And in the end, he gave us everything. He made us remember who we were. We stood in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, watching the night settle. The house was no longer just a building. It was a testament. The garden was no longer just a plot of land. It was a sanctuary. The quiet was no longer loneliness. It was peace, earned and deep. My story had begun with a knock on the door, with a betrayal that shattered my world. It ends here on this porch, with my daughter's arm around me and the scent of violets on the night air. It ends not with a victory cry, but with a contented sigh. It ends with the understanding that the greatest revenge of all is a life lived fully, freely, and fiercely loved. The true end.